Advanced Potion Making. Introduction. The potions within this book are considered advanced inasmuch as each of them is not only difficult to produce, but also contain the possibility of being disastrous if brewed incorrectly. Students should only attempt potions herein under the supervision and tutelage of a potion master. Nomenclature in advanced potion making as an art, and not simply as the title of this work, can be quite confusing due to the fact that chemical names often bear no relation to composition. For example, lead sulfide is sometimes referred to as the black sulfur root because of its color and the heat used in its preparation from sulfur. While the authors of this book have taken every measure to ensure use of only the most common nomenclatures, mistakes should be avoided by cross-referencing the symbol chart as much as possible. Students may also wish to keep a personal copy in a separate notebook. It is advisable for students to take careful note of processes as outlined within: distillation, coagulation, dissolution, filtration, calcination, deconstruction, and reconstruction, infusion, crushing, cutting, boiling, scalding, and straining. Each of these processes are unique in effect, and students should not interchange them without the express guidance of a potion master. A note on alchemy as proto-magic. A common misperception of ancient alchemists is that they were pseudo-wizards who attempted to turn lead into gold, create love from concoction alone, and believed that the universe was composed of only the four elements of earth, air, fire, and water. This picture was obviously rather unfair. Although some ancient alchemists were indeed crackpots and charlatans, most were well-meaning and intelligent wizards. These people in many ways served as innovators and attempted to explore and investigate the nature of chemical substances and processes. They had to rely on experimentation, traditional know-how, rules of thumb, and speculative thought in their attempts to uncover the mysteries of the magical universe. At the same time, it was clear to the alchemists that something was generally being conserved in chemical processes, even in the most dramatic changes of physical state and appearance, i.e., that substances contain some principles that could be hidden under many outer forms and revealed by proper manipulation. Throughout the history of the discipline, alchemists struggled to understand the nature of these principles and find some order and sense in the results of their experiments, which were often undermined by impure or poorly characterized reagents, the lack of quantitative measurements, and confusing and inconsistent nomenclature. Relationship between wizard and potion. While the use of wands, incantations, and general skill are all relevant in general newt-level potion making, they are even more so herein. Students should be mindful of their own abilities and should not attempt recipes they do not feel equipped to handle. It should be said that this is not a shortcoming and that the greatest potion masters in history have all had certain potions they would not attempt. This book does not, therefore, contain any potions which would allow the student to build up a false sense of self, thereby opening the gateway to greater peril in later studies. The book begins by introducing alchemy, equipment, and ingredients, then moves into a chapter on nearly impossible potions, and continues thusly. Students unable to complete all the potions in this book should not be discouraged. An experienced potions master is, however, a necessity for many careers in the wizarding world, and students seeking ministry occupations such as aurors or obliviators should set their mind to accomplishing as much as magically possible. A final thought from the publishers. Potions are tools just like spells. Keep your cauldron as close as your wand, in mind and heart, if not in reality. With study, determination, and a little hard work, you can learn to bewitch the mind and ensnare the senses. A true potion master can bottle fame, brew glory, and even put a stopper in death. If that doesn't excite you, you may be in the wrong class. Good luck. Chapter 1. An Introduction to Alchemy. What is alchemy? Alchemy is an influential philosophical tradition whose practitioners have, from antiquity, claimed it to be the precursor to profound powers. The defining objectives of alchemy are varied, but historically have typically included one or more of the following goals: the creation of the fabled philosopher's stone, the ability to transform base metals into the noble metals, gold or silver, and development of an elixir of life which would confer youth and longevity. The Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone is a legendary substance capable of turning inexpensive metals into gold. It was sometimes believed to be an elixir of life, useful for rejuvenation and possibly for achieving immortality. For a long time, it was the most sought-after goal in Western alchemy. In the view of spiritual alchemy, making the Philosopher's Stone would bring enlightenment upon the maker and conclude the great work. It is also known by several other names, such as materia prima, the white stone by the river, the sword in the stone, all the same, meaning that which contains knowledge of creation, a symbol that represents the final outcome of man's inner transformation, of the conversion of the base metal of his outer character to the golden properties of his higher self. It is all about the evolution of consciousness in the alchemy of time. There is, of course, a strong link between symbols for the Philosopher's Stone and that of the Deathly Hallows. Etymology. The word alchemy may derive from the Old French alchimie, which from the medieval Latin alchimia, and which is in turn from the Arabic alchimia. This term itself derived from the ancient Greek chemeia or chemia, with the addition of the Arabic definite article al. The ancient Greek word may have been derived from a version of the Egyptian name for Egypt, which was itself based on the ancient Egyptian word kemet. The word could also have originally derived from the Greek choumeia, meaning mixture, and referring to pharmaceutical chemistry. The etymology of the word is still open to question. Alchemy in medieval Europe. The introduction of alchemy to Latin Europe occurred on the 11th of February, 1144, with the completion of Robert of Chester's translation of the Arabic book of the Composition of Alchemy. Although European craftsmen and technicians pre-existed, Robert notes in his preface that alchemy was unknown in Latin Europe at the time of his writing. The translation of Arabic texts concerning numerous disciplines, including alchemy, flourished in the 12th century. Toledo, Spain, through contributors like Gerard of Ceremonia and Adelard of Bath. Translations of the time included the Turba Philosophorum and the works of Avicenna and Al-Razi. These brought with them many new words to the European vocabulary, for which there was no previous Latin equivalent. Alcohol, carboy, elixir, and althanor are examples. Meanwhile, theologian contemporaries of the translators made strides towards the reconciliation of faith and experimental rationalism, thereby priming Europe for the influx of alchemical thought. Saint Anselm, from 1033 to 1109, put forth the opinion that faith and rationalism were compatible and encouraged rationalism in a Christian context. Peter Abelard followed Anselm's work, laying down the foundation for acceptance of Aristotelian thought before the first works of Aristotle had reached the West. And later, Robert Grosseteste used Abelard's methods of analysis and added the use of observation, experimentation, and conclusions when conducting scientific investigations. Grosseteste also did much work to reconcile Platonic and Aristotelian thinking. Through much of the 12th and 13th centuries, alchemical knowledge in Europe remained centered around translations, and new Latin contributions were not made. The efforts of the translators were succeeded by that of the encyclopedists Albert Magnus and Roger Bacon are some of the more notable of these. Their works explained and summarized the newly imported alchemical knowledge in Aristotelian terms. There is little to suggest that Albertus Magnus, a Dominican, was himself an alchemist. In his authentic works, such as De Mineralibus, he observed and commented on the operations and theories of alchemical authorities like Hermes and Democritus, and unnamed alchemists of the time. Albertus critically compared these writings of Aristotle and Avicenna, where they concerned the transmutation of metals. From the time shortly after his death through to the 15th century, 28 or more alchemical tracts were misattributed to him, a common practice giving rise to his reputation as an accomplished alchemist. Likewise, alchemical texts have been attributed to Albert's student Thomas Aquinas. Roger Bacon was an Oxford Franciscan who studied a wide variety of topics, including optics, languages, and medicine. After studying the pseudo-Aristotelian Secretum Secretorum around 1247, he dramatically shifted his studies towards a vision of a universal science, which included alchemy and astrology. Bacon maintained that Albertus Magnus's ignorance of the fundamentals of alchemy prevented a complete picture of wisdom. While alchemy was not more important to him than any of the other sciences, and he did not produce symbolic allegorical works, Bacon's contributions advanced alchemy's connections to soteriology and Christian theology. Bacon's writings demonstrated an integration of morality, salvation, alchemy, and the prolongation of life. His correspondence with Pope Clement IV highlighted this integration, calling attention to the importance of alchemy to the papacy. Like the Greeks before him, Bacon acknowledged the division of alchemy into the practical and theoretical. He noted that the theoretical lay outside the scope of Aristotle, the natural philosophers, and all Latin writers of this time. The practical, however, confirmed the theoretical through experiment, and Bacon advocated its uses in natural science and medicine. Soon after Bacon, the influential work of Pseudo-Gerber appeared. His Summa Perfectionis remained a staple summary of alchemical practice and theory throughout the medieval and Renaissance periods. It was notable for its inclusion of practical chemical operations alongside sulfur-mercury theory and the unusual clarity with which they were described. By the end of the 13th century, alchemy had developed into a fairly structured system of belief. Adepts believed in the macrocosm-microcosm theories of Hermes. That is to say, they believed that the processes that affect minerals and other substances could have an effect on the human body. For example, if one could learn the secret of purifying gold, one could use the technique to purify the human soul. They believed in the four elements and the four qualities as described above, and they had a strong tradition of cloaking their written ideas in a labyrinth of coded jargon set with traps to mislead the uninitiated. Finally, the alchemists practiced their art. They actively experimented with chemicals and made observations and theories about how the universe operated. Their entire philosophy revolved around their belief that man's soul was divided within himself after the fall of Adam. By purifying the two parts of man's soul, man could be reunited with God. In the 14th century, alchemy became more accessible to Europeans outside the confines of Latin-speaking churchmen and scholars. Alchemical discourse shifted from scholarly philosophical debate to an exposed social commentary on the alchemists themselves. Dante, Piers the Plowman, and Chaucer all painted unflattering pictures of alchemists as thieves and liars. Pope John XII's 1317 edict, Spondent quas non exhibitant, forbade the false promises of transmutation made by pseudo-alchemists. In 1403, Henry IV of England banned the practice of multiplying metals, although it was possible to buy a license to attempt to make gold alchemically, and a number were granted by Henry VI and Edward IV. These critiques and regulations centered more around pseudo-alchemical charlatanism than the actual study of alchemy, which continued with an increasingly Christian tone. The 14th century saw the Christian imagery of death and resurrection employed in the alchemical texts of Petrus Bonus, Drawn of Rupescissa, and in works written in the name of Raymond Lull and Arnold of Villanova. Nicholas Flamel. Nicholas Flamel, born in 1330, is a well-known alchemist and only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone, a legendary substance with incredible powers. He owes his considerable age to the elixir of life, which he and his wife, Perenelle, created using the stone. They are currently aged 632 and 626, respectively, living out the remainder of their long lives in Devon. Flamel is noted as an alchemist of considerable talent and as an opera lover. Although it is clear that he used the elixir to greatly extend his life, it is not specified whether he used the stone's powers to make himself greatly wealthy, as the stone is also capable of turning any metal into gold. Further reading. Alchemists enjoy prestige and support through the centuries, although not for their pursuit of those goals, nor the mystic and philosophical speculation that dominates their literature. Rather, it was their mundane contributions to the chemical industries of the day. Alchemy has been a field of study since antiquity. As the time went on, the lack of common words for chemical concepts and processes, as well as the need for secrecy to avoid Muggle persecution, led alchemists to borrow the terms and symbols of biblical and pagan mythology, astrology, Kabbalah, and other esoteric fields. This marked a progress in alchemical research as it allowed the exchange of ideas between alchemists. However, this also ended up making the plainest chemical recipe read like an abstruse magical incantation, probably inhibiting the learning and spreading of alchemy as a science. Zhou Yan, widely considered one of the fathers of Chinese scientific thought, was also an alchemist in the 4th century BC, during the final years of the Zhou dynasty. The African wizards have always been particularly skilled in alchemy and astronomy. Some scholars, like Kenilworthy Wisp, believe that Quidditch was introduced in Africa by European witches and wizards traveling there in search of alchemical and astronomical information. Paracelsus, apart from his important contributions to the field of medicine, was also a secretive alchemist in the 16th century. According to an alchemical work, which original translation from Latin dated back to 1557, the constituents of the perfect medicine are vinegar, salt, urine, sal ammoniac, and a particular sulfur vive. Chapter 2. Alchemical Symbols. Introduction. There are often many symbols for an element or process. For a time, the astronomical symbols of the planets were used to denote the elements. However, as alchemists came to be persecuted, particularly in medieval times, secret symbols were invented. This led to a great deal of confusion, so you will find some overlap of symbols. Planetary symbols. Planetary metals were dominated or ruled by one of the 7 planets known by the ancient potion masters. Although they occasionally have a symbol of their own, they were usually symbolized by the planet's symbol. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto were not yet discovered when the original potion masters linked the planetary metals, though many modern alchemists and potioneers consider them representative of uranium, neptunium, and plutonium, respectively. Zodiac symbols. The 12 original alchemical processes are considered to be the basis of modern potion-making processes. Each of these processes is dominated or ruled by one of the 12 zodiac signs. The Emerald Formula and the Emerald Tablet. The Emerald Formula was later formed from the previous set of 12 processes. It is a 7-stepped process derived from the precepts of the Emerald Tablet that became the basis of all the alchemist's experiments. The Emerald Tablet, also known as the Smaragdine Table or Tabula Smaragdina, is a compact and cryptic piece of hermetica reputed to contain the secret of the prima materia and its transmutation. It was highly regarded by European alchemists as the foundation of their art and its hermetic tradition. The original source of the Emerald Tablet is unknown. Although Hermes Trismegistus is the author named in the text, its first known appearance is in a book written in Arabic between the 6th and 8th centuries. This text was first translated into Latin in the 12th century. Numerous translations, interpretations, and commentaries followed. The wording on the tablet is revealed in the following transcription. In truth, without deceit, certain and most veritable. That which is below corresponds to that which is above, and that which is above corresponds to that which is below, to accomplish the miracles of the one thing, and just as all things have come from this one thing, through the meditation of one mind, so do all created things originate from this one thing, through transformation. Its father is the sun, its mother the moon. The wind carries it in its belly, its nurse is the earth. It is the origin of all, the consecration of the universe. Its inherent strength is perfected, if it is turned into earth. Separate the earth from fire, the subtle from the gross, gently and with great ingenuity. It rises from earth to heaven and descends again to earth, thereby combining within itself the powers of both the above and the below. Thus you will obtain the glory of the whole universe. all obscurity will be clear to you. This is the greatest force of all powers, because it overcomes every single thing and penetrates every solid thing. In this way, the universe was created. From this comes many wondrous applications, because this is the pattern. Therefore am I called thrice greatest Hermes, having all three parts of the wisdom of the whole universe. Herein I completely explained the operation of the sun. The first 4 steps take place below in the realm of matter. The last 3 steps take place above in the realm of mind and imagination. This dynamic process is graphically depicted in the figure of O.W.L.S. The O.W.L.S is an ancient symbol depicting a serpent or dragon swallowing its own tail and forming a circle. The following 7 pages give a brief description of the 7 processes along with visual representations. Calcination 1. The first of 7 major operations in the alchemy of transformation. Chemically, the calcination process involves heating a substance in a crucible or over an open flame until it is reduced to ashes. In the Arcanum experiment, calcination is represented by sulfuric acid, which the alchemist made from a naturally occurring substance called vitriol. Sulfuric acid is a powerful corrosive that eats away flesh and reacts with all metals except gold. Dissolution 2. The second of 7 major operations in the alchemy of transformation. A chemical process, it is the dissolving of the ashes from calcination in water. In the Arcanum experiment, dissolution is represented by iron oxide or rust, which illustrated the potentially corrosive powers of water on even the hardest metals. When processed, vitriol breaks down into sulfuric acid and iron oxide, which are the first 2 arcana or secret ingredients. Separation 3. The third of 7 major operations in the alchemy of transformation. Chemically, it is the isolation of the components of dissolution by filtration and then discarding any ungenuine or unworthy material. In the Arcanum experiment, separation is represented by the compound sodium carbonate, which separates out water and appears as white soda ash on dry lake beds. The oldest known deposits are in Egypt. The alchemists sometimes referred to this compound as natron. Conjunction 4. The fourth of 7 major operations in the alchemy of transformation. Chemically, it is the recombination of the saved elements from separation into a new substance. In the Arcanum experiment, conjunction is symbolized by a nitrate compound known as cubic saltpetre, which the alchemist called natron or simply salt. Blue-colored natron acid, aquafortis, was made by mixing potassium nitrate with sulfuric acid and was used to separate silver from gold. Fermentation 5. The fifth of 7 major operations in the alchemy of transformation. Chemically, fermentation is the growth of a ferment in organic solutions, such as occurs in the fermenting of grapes to produce wine. In the Arcanum experiment, the process of fermentation is represented by a compound called liquor herpatus, which is an oily reddish-brown mixture of ammonia and the rotten egg-smelling compound hydrogen sulfide. Distillation 6. The sixth of 7 major operations in the alchemy of transformation. Chemically, the boiling and condensation of the fermented solution to increase its purity. In the Arcanum experiment, distillation is represented by a compound known as black pulvis solaris, which is made by mixing black antimony with purified sulfur. The two immediately clump together to make what the alchemists called a bezoar, a kind of sublimated solid that forms in the intestines and brain. Coagulation, 7. The seventh and final of these 7 major operations in the alchemy of transformation. Chemically, coagulation is the precipitation or sublimation of the purified ferment from distillation. In the Arcanum experiment, coagulation is represented by a compound called red pulvis solaris, which is a reddish-orange powder of pure sulfur mixed with the therapeutic mercury compound, red mercuric oxide. Tria prima, the 3 primes of alchemy. Sulfur, the fluid connecting the high and the low. Sulfur was used to denote the expansive force, evaporation, and dissolution. Salt, base matter. Salt represented the contractive force, condensation, and crystallization. Mercury, the omnipresent spirit of life. Mercury was believed to transcend the liquid and solid states, and also life, death, and heaven-earth. From his study of the elements, Paracelsus adopted the idea of tripartite alternatives to explain the nature of medicine, taking the place of a combustible element, sulfur, a fluid and changeable element, mercury, and a solid, permanent element, salt. The first mention of the mercury-sulfur-salt model was in the opus Paramirum dating to about 1530. Paracelsus believed that the principles sulfur, mercury, and salt contained the poisons contributing to all diseases. He saw each disease as having 3 separate cures depending on how it was afflicted, either being caused by the poisoning of sulfur, mercury, or salt. Paracelsus drew the importance of sulfur, salt, and mercury from medieval alchemy, where they all occupied a prominent place. He demonstrated his theory by burning a piece of wood. The fire was the work of sulfur, the smoke was mercury, and the residual ash was salt. Paracelsus also believed that mercury, sulfur, and salt provided a good explanation for the nature of medicine because each of these properties existed in many physical forms. With every disease, the symptoms depended on which of the 3 principal caused the ailment. Paracelsus theorized that materials that are poisonous in large doses may be positive in small doses. He demonstrated this with the examples of magnetism and static electricity, where a small magnet can attract much larger metals. The Tria Prima also defined the human identity. Sulfur embodied the soul, the emotions and desires. Salt represented the body, mercury epitomized the spirit, imagination, moral judgment, and the higher mental faculties. By understanding the chemical nation of the Tria Prima, a physician could discover the means of curing disease. The classical elements. In classical thought, the 4 elements, earth, water, air, and fire, frequently occur, sometimes including a 5th element or quintessence, called aether in ancient Greece and akasha in India. The concept of the 5 elements formed a basis of analysis in both Hinduism and Buddhism. In Hinduism, particularly in an esoteric context, the 4 states of matter describe matter, and a 5th element describes that which was beyond the material world. Similar lists existed in ancient China and Japan. In Buddhism, the four great elements, to which two others are sometimes added, are not viewed as substances, but as categories of sensory experience. Animals and alchemy. At the core of alchemy was a vision of an alchemical process occurring through a cycle of color changes, from an initial blackness to the perfection of the quintessence. The alchemist envisaged each stage of the process by being heralded by a color change and a meeting with certain animals. The black crow. The black crow, sometimes also called the raven, is the beginning of the great work of soul alchemy. The phase of blackening, which usually marked the beginning of the work, was brought about by either heating the prima materia in the process of calcination, the dry way of the alchemists, or by the process of putrefaction, a slow rotting or digestion over a period of weeks or months, the so-called wet way. The black crow or raven was often associated with this calcination, for on vigorous heating the calcination material would usually carbonize, and layers would flake off and move like a crow's wings in the flask. The white swan. The temporary phase of whitening which followed on from the black stage was symbolized by the white swan or white eagle. As the black mass of the calcination was reacted with other substances and heated, it took on a white crust or dusty layer which sometimes puffed up and flew up in a cloud in the flask, as heat exploded bubbles of gas out of the black substance below. This was the white eagle of the dry way. In the wet way, the dark putrefying matter sometimes began to form white patches, often fungal growths floating on the surface, or white crystals glowing out of the mass. This could be pictured as the white swan, which was at home upon the surface of the water, yet fed off of the dark mud at the bottom of the stream or lake. Its whiteness, contrasting with the mud on which it is observed to feed, made it a fine symbol of how spiritual purity could be gained from the unpromising primal material. The pelican. The pelican is shown stabbing its breast with its beak and nourishing its young with its own blood. The alchemist must enter into a kind of sacrificial relationship with his inner being. He must nourish with his own soul forces the developing spiritual embryo within. It is used to represent multiplication, the process used to increase the potency of the philosopher's stone, elixir, or projection powder. It occurs near the end of the magnum opus in order to increase the gains in the subsequent projection. The phoenix. In alchemy, the phoenix bird represents the culmination of the opus. Understanding the mythology of this fantastic creature reveals the reason alchemists chose it to represent successful completion of their work. As far as we know, humans alone possess the knowledge of their own mortality. That we know we will die gives meaning to our days. In myth, the phoenix was endowed with this sacred knowledge. Thus, in seeing its death draw near, the phoenix prepared a nest of wood and resin upon which it would perch itself. It then exposed the nest to the full force of the sun's rays. The embers, bursting into flames, consumed the phoenix and reduced it to ashes. Out of these ashes arose another phoenix. The rebirth of the phoenix reflects the aspect of immortality associated with the philosopher's stone. The peacock. At this point, the alchemists would often encounter the peacock's tail, a sudden appearance of a rush of colors, an iridescence on the surface of the material in the flask, which made some think they had achieved their goal. This could arise through the formation of a layer of oil on the surface of the watery mass in the wet way, or some oxidation reduction reactions, say on the surface of the liquid metal in the dry way. This was the stage of fermentation in alchemical processes. It was a fleeting show of color changes that pointed to the fact that one was on the right path and reabsorbed the energies released in initial emergence of the polarities. It was a midway point of the process, which could be seen as a false conclusion. The Green Lion. Physically, the green lion was usually a name for vitriol, or the sulfuric acid created by distilling the green crystals of iron sulfate in a flask. Iron sulfate was formed when iron ores rich in sulfides were left to oxidize in the air, so it was readily available to medieval alchemists. The sharp penetrating sulfuric acid could create major chemical changes in many materials, even to the extent of dissolving metals like iron and copper. The green lion could also be the nitric acid formed from heating saltpetre or nitre and iron sulfate. Nitric acid, when mixed with the acid derived from common salt, hydrochloric acid, produced aqua regia, a greenish-tinged liquid that could dissolve even the noble metal gold. The green lion devouring the sun is a famous image in alchemy, being depicted in many manuscripts and engravings, and can be the thought of as aqua regia dissolving the solar gold and forming a solution which could readily tinge metals with gold. To other alchemists who worked primarily with vegetable matter and processes rather than the mineral work, the green lion was an image of the green raw energy of nature. Here, the green lion, which devours the sun, is the green pigment chlorophyll. The green leaves of the plant are formed out of the energy of sunlight. Alchemists often attempted to create living processes in their flasks, and often looked especially for precipitates or crystallizations which resembled leaves or plant forms. The green lion here could be a plant sap extract, which was often the prima materia for their alchemical work. The griffin, half eagle and half lion, was sometimes associated with the end of this stage. The eagle nature of the griffin gave this hybrid being an ability to ascend in the flask, so it marked, in a sense, the spiritualization of the green lion. The gray wolf. In the work with minerals, the metal antimony was referred to as the gray wolf, because when molten, it greedily swallowed up many other metals, such as copper, tin, and lead, by forming alloys. In this sense, it behaved like metallic mercury, which also readily amalgamated with metals. The gray wolf of antimony became especially important in the early 17th century alchemy, its curative properties being popularized through the writings published under the name of Basil Valentine. To an extent, it became an analog for the work with minerals of the green lion of the work with plant substances. The Ouroboros. The Ouroboros is an ancient symbol depicting a serpent or dragon eating its own tail. The name originates from within Greek language, aura meaning tail and boros meaning eating, thus he who eats the tail. The Ouroboros represents the perpetual cyclic renewal of life and infinity, the concept of eternity and the eternal return, and represents the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, leading to immortality, as in the phoenix. The current mathematical symbol for infinity may be derived from a variant on the classic Ouroboros with the snake looped once before eating its own tail. and such depictions of the double loop as a snake eating its own tail are common today in fantasy art and fantasy literature, though other conjectures also exist. It can also represent the idea of primordial unity related to something existing in or persisting before any beginning with such force or qualities it cannot be extinguished. The Ouroboros has been important in religious and mythological symbolism, but has also been frequently used in alchemical illustrations, where it symbolizes the circular nature of the alchemist's opus. It is also often associated with Gnosticism and Hermeticism, showing itself primarily in ancient Gnostic texts. The Ouroboros is an image of a snake, worm, serpent, or dragon biting its own tail. Generally, taking on a circular form, the symbol is representative of many broad concepts: time, life, continuity, completion, the repetition of history, the self-sufficiency of nature, and the rebirth of the earth can all be seen within the circular boundaries of the Ouroboros. The toad. The toad was a better symbol of the putrefaction than the black crow, the decaying mass slowly pulsating and shifting as gases were given off, while the substance rotted down to a black mass. Measuring symbols. In this book, measures such as these have been written out in full to avoid any confusion in potion making. However, it is a required skill in later study to understand and correctly use all alchemical symbols, including those listed below. Chapter 3. Potion Making Equipment. Introduction. You may think that the most important part of potion making is the ingredients, and you would be right. But the second most important part is the equipment you use to work the ingredients into a potion. You may think that the choice between a silver stirring rod or a wooden one won't make that much difference to your potion. The truth is, in fact, the complete opposite, as the following pages will discuss. The tools you choose for potion making are very important in achieving the desired potion, just as much as using quality ingredients is. Using the correct equipment allows you to make the recipe in perfect conditions, as the author, in this case me, intended. If you use the wrong tools or even poor quality tools and your recipe goes wrong, it will be almost impossible to know where the problem originated. Cauldrons. Pewter. A standard cauldron for beginners, capable for use with a wide range of potions and only costing around 15 galleons. Pewter cauldrons brew at a slow speed. This cauldron may only be used for non-state effective potions, meaning those whose ingredients are not altered by imperfections during the brewing process. Brass. Costing slightly more than pewter at around 20 galleons, the brass cauldron is the next step up for semi-experienced potioneers. The thermal conductivity of brass is twice that of pewter, meaning that the brew times for potions will be halved. A brew time of 1 hour in a pewter cauldron will reduce to ½ hour in a brass one. Gold. Gold cauldrons are the most expensive of the 5 types due to their material cost, anything from 300 galleons upwards. They are therefore very rarely used. There are no potions in this book where a gold cauldron is strictly necessary, but some potioneers favor them when available due to their ease of cleaning and lack of corrosion. Copper. Considered the best for all-around potion making due to their mid-level price range of 45 galleons, the thermal conductivity of copper is about 6 times that of pewter, meaning that the brew times for potions will be reduced by a factor of 6. A brew time of 1 hour in a pewter cauldron will be reduced to 10 minutes in a copper one. Silver. This cauldron type is mainly used for potions linked to the lunar cycle, or those that do not require an extended period of high-temperature brewing. Potions that require a silver cauldron almost always require a silver stirring rod too. Silver cauldrons are available new from 100 galleons upwards. The symbol lambda represents the thermal conductivity rating for each cauldron. As an example, the list below shows the time taken for 10 pints of water to boil at a medium heat in each. Once you have the correct cauldron type for your potion, you will almost certainly need a number of other tools for the preparation or brewing processes. The following list details a few, by no means all, of the most commonly required equipment. Protective gloves. Varying thicknesses of gloves are required depending on the volatility of ingredients and potions. Simple canvas or wool gloves can be used for less potions, whereas leather or even dragonhide gloves are essential for dangerous work. Fireproof gloves, although primarily used in dragon care, are good to have on hand, particularly when it is necessary to handle potions while still hot. Preparation equipment. Before weighing and measuring your ingredients, you will usually need to sort, cut, or powder them. Varying types of knife can be used, although they must always be suitably sharp, depending on the ingredient. Silver knives must be used alongside silver cauldrons and stirring rods for lunar cycle-based potions. A pestle and mortar will be needed to attain a required level of pulverization from coarse to fine. Brass scales. An essential tool for calculating the correct amount of ingredients. A set of brass scales will set you back roughly 3 galleons from most wizarding shops and apothecaries. It is very important to take good care of these, as the smallest inaccuracy in measuring can cause eyebrow singeing later in the brewing process. Other measuring tools. For liquids, either a graduated cylinder or a pipette must be used instead of scales. These are relatively cheap items, costing sickles rather than galleons, and must also be looked after carefully and cleaned regularly to maintain their optimum usage. Containers. For some potions, certain elements must be removed from the cauldron so that others can be worked on. Beakers, tumblers, and phials are ideal for this, preferably glass or crystal. Stirring rods. In most cases, but not all, the type of stirring rod will relate to the type of cauldron you are using. Therefore, their materials are mostly the same, predominantly brass, gold, copper, and silver, but also include wooden and glass rods. Wooden rods can be used in most potions and should be used when needed if no specific type is suggested. Glass rods are usually used in the later stages of potions that turn clear in their process, such as veritaserum. A whisk may also be required. Sieving equipment. Materials such as parchment paper for viscous liquids or mucilin should be readily available for the removal of unwanted sediment or ingredient remnants. Unicorn tail hair is the preferred choice, but is rare and difficult to obtain and therefore expensive. Displacement equipment. At certain points in the potion brewing process, it may be necessary to remove oily residue or ingredient remnants on the surface or edges of the cauldron. A scoring charm can be used in some cases, but various siphons or scrapers are useful for this when spell use is dangerous. Storage equipment. Once the potion has been completed, you will need to transfer it into suitable storage containers. This is entirely dependent on the potion and the amount produced. Storage flasks or phials are useful, but airtight containers provide a safer solution. Label all storage containers with the potion name and the date of creation. Store potions safely in suitable environments corresponding to the individual potion requirements.